In this video you will learn how you can make realistic underwater lighting using Blender and DaVinci Resolve. Both of these are free programs, so you can get started right away. Alright, so here we are in Blender 4.2.1, the newest version of Blender as of recording this video. And I'm just going to delete the default cube and add in a new one. What we want to do with this volumetric chapter is just set up our underwater properties, sort of. So how everything will act. With this cube here, I'm going to hit F2 on my keyboard and rename it to either water or volumetrics or volume or whatever you want. And then I'm just going to move it up so the origin is at the bottom. And then just scaling it up to something like 20 on the X and Y, and then probably like 5 or 10 on the Z axis. Then make sure to apply all transforms by pressing Ctrl A, and then this will be our water cube. Then what I want to do is go over to the shader editor, just add in a new material, call this water or volumetrics or whatever, and then go over to viewport shading, and then make sure you are on cycles with GPU if you have one, and then just set up an HDRI. So click environment texture just so we get some basic lighting. What you can also do is go over to this drop down here and disable scene world. That will also give you a default HDRI that comes with Blender. And I always like to choose this one since it doesn't really have anything unusual like buildings or trees. It's just a flat plane. But this will just be for the preview, so don't think too much about it. We just need some lighting. Alright, just zooming in on our material here. We're going to be deleting the principled BSDF shader and replacing that with a principled volume. Just add that in here and connect the volume output to the volume input on the material output. And you will see some nice volumetrics going on. Now, if we go inside, you will see that it's pretty dark, but we're going to be fixing that with lights later. The closer you get to the edge, the more you will see. Alright, for the color, you can choose a bluish color. If you are in like an ocean, you can get like a deeper blue and maybe a little bit darker. If you are in shallow water, you can pick more of like a cyan tint or like murky water. Just choose the water you want to make. So for me, that would be a little bit more blue like this, and then just make it a little bit darker. Then for our density, I want to set this to 0.5. just so it's a little bit less dense, but I still want to create a pretty deep underwater lighting effect like you saw in the intro. If you want this to be a little bit more shallow, you can just decrease the density to whatever you find looks the best for your particular scenario. Something else you can do is if you go inside now with the density of 0.2, we can go to the edge a little bit more. And if we change this anisotropy value to something higher, you will see it becomes brighter near the source of the light. So if I now move up and I turn on my HDRI with the world opacity, you will see that our sun is there. And if we go back into the water, you will see that there is the brightest part inside of our volume. So what this will basically do is push the density to the parts that receive the most amount of light, and in the other areas keep it a little bit less dense, just so we get those nice light rays coming in. So I usually set this to about 0.8 or 0.9 underwater, somewhere in between. Just a full one will make it look like this. And I think you can tell that this is not really what you want. So something like 0.8 will be fine for our use case. And since I want this to be a little bit deeper water, I'm going to set my density to 0.5. And if we now go in, this will already look like you are pretty deep underwater. All right, a little bit of the recording cut out, but that shouldn't be a problem. We can just continue from right here. So we have our principled volume with density 0.5, the color and the anisotropy, and yeah, we can just continue with the surface of the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a glass BSDF shader that will look like this, nice and shiny, but it will also make the volume completely black under, and we're going to fix that later. First, just set the IOR, which is the index of refraction, to the index of refraction of water, which is 1 plus 1 divided by 3, and that will look like this. It changes a little bit, but it just makes it more accurate. And then what I want to do is add in some ripples to the water, so I added a bump map with a noise texture, put the fact into the height and the normal to the normal. That will look like this. Increase the scale a little bit and the detail, just so it looks good for your particular scene, and that will be fine. And now what we can do is add in a mix shader node, and then add in a transparent node, transparent BSDF. Put the transparent BSDF in the bottom shader, and the glass BSDF in the top one. And then I'm going to add in a light path node, and I'm going to grab the shadow ray, and I'm going to use this as the factor. And what this will basically do is just bring back the light to our volume. So this is without and this is with, and basically what this will do is it will look at the light ray, and if it is a shadow ray, it will just completely make it transparent. So just ignore it, and that will mean that our volume is not overshadowed by like the surface, if that makes sense. All right, so from the top that looks great, and from inside that also looks great. But one thing I personally don't like is, because we're using a glass BSDF for this, this pretty much just looks like we're looking at a plane of glass with a little bit of bump. So what I always like to do is adding in another mix shader node and another transparent BSDF, putting the shader into the bottom one, and then just leaving the factor at 0.5 or a little bit less, depending on what I want. And this will just make it look a little bit more cohesive, and we'll get rid of that glassy look to the water. But that is optional. Only do it if you like it yourself. All right, so that will be it for our surface of the water, and yeah, for the volumetric part as well. So let's get over to the next chapter. Alright, so let's get over to the lighting portion of this course. So what we want to do is we want to add in those nice God rays that you saw in the previews. So to do that, I am going to add in a spotlight, and then we are going to go over to the material editor and click use nodes. This will allow you to change the light with nodes. First, I'm going to make this a little bit brighter, and a lot brighter actually, something like 50,000 watts, just so it's nice and bright. And I'm also going to copy over the color of the water and paste that in here on the color, just so it matches up with the water. If we go to our camera that we placed and just make sure that our spot is visible, you will see it just makes the water a little bit brighter there, but that's not really what we care about right now. We want to give this a nice texture that we can animate, and we can get some nice caustics going on. And for this portion, I'm just going to be using Polyfjord's approach to this, since in my experience, it's pretty much just the best approach you can get to fake caustics in Blender. So I'll link that video down below. It's a really nice video, and yeah, the result is amazing. But in short, you want to add in a Voronoi texture, set this to 4D so you can change the seed, and then just duplicate this. Make sure this is set to smooth F1 on both of these, and on this bottom one we want to set the randomness, and on this bottom one we want to set the smoothness to 0, and on the top one the smoothness to 1. And then with a mix color node, do a difference calculation with this, and then we can put that into the lamp. Now we want to add in a mapping coordinate and just set this to the normal, since lamps use the normal coordinate for that. As you can see, we have some caustics going on. Now we just want to select everything here and click Ctrl G to group it, and then we can put the W factor to an input and the scale to an input, and maybe the randomness if you want to change that. Probably not, but it's free to connect them anyway. And yeah, that should be good. We can also add in a color ramp just to define the edges a little bit more. So drag in the black a little bit and the white as well until it looks something like that. And now we can tap back, and now we have our nice caustics. Increase the scale so we have a little bit more of those lines, something like that. And then with this W factor we can animate it. And we can do that with a driver, so we can hit hashtag frame, and then if we hit enter, this will move depending on the frame. And we can then divide this by something like 1200, something really big, just so it goes a little bit slower. Now in our camera, we can just move our light, probably make the density a little bit bigger, just so we can actually see it. And maybe the intensity a little bit higher as well. And yeah, as you can see, we now have nice caustics here. And if we hit play, you will see that they actually move depending on our frame. And this is basically what I did for my scene. So we want this spotlight for our caustics. So just rename this to caustics, and basically you will just move this depending on where your camera is, and just move it higher if you want a bigger spread like that, or just closer if you want it tighter. And something else I also like to do if I'm deep underwater is add in a area light, then move it to the top of the water so it's just above. Scale it up to the entire size of the water. So for me that's 40 times. And now just increase the power to something like 10,000. And if we go back into the camera, you'll see this is without and this is with. Just adds in a little bit more light. Generally speaking, you want to match up the caustics with your brightest source of light. So that would be the sun here. So just rotate it until it's looking the right way, and then just, yeah, closely match it, something like this, because that's where the caustics will be coming from. And then this area light will just help if you don't have a pretty strong HDRI, which we do have right now. I also recommend setting the color to either white or like a sky color, something really light blue. And you can increase the intensity depending on what you want. Something else about the lighting, if you are using an HDRI, which I have set up here, you can go over to the world shader type. And if you are completely underwater, we of course don't need this grass here because that wouldn't be there. So we can fix that a little bit. All right, so here with our HDRI, I want to add in a texture coordinate node, and then I want to grab this generated coordinate and I want to add in a separate XYZ node, and I want to grab the Z value, as you can see, and then I want to add in a mixed color node, put the Z to the bottom value, set the factor to 1, and then I just want to multiply the Z factor with our HDRI, and that will get rid of the ground completely and give a nice gradient to the bottom here. If you don't want that gradient, you can also add in a math node and set this to greater than 0, and that will just make it completely flat. You should also do this if you have like a clean HDRI with a blue floor, which I can show you right now. Yeah, something like this HDRI. If we look at it, it is like just a sky, and then the bottom is just completely blue. And that will also give some lighting from the bottom, which is something you don't want. So you just multiply it again. Either with or without the greater than. Maybe you can do a multiply just so you do have a gradient, but it's not, yeah, that intense all over. Something like 10, and then just make sure to clamp it just in case. And yeah, that's how you do the lighting. So now we can set up our caustics again with our sun, which is over there. If you're using a procedural sun, this will be even easier because you have the exact location of your sun. But for us, we kind of have to guess something like that, and then place our camera here, get the spotlight a little bit closer like that, make it a little bit brighter. That's pretty bright. Something like this. And then you can just, yeah, play with everything you want. So the scale, maybe a little bit bigger, more of those lines. That's how you do the nice caustics. So let's get over to the next chapter. Alright, so now we can get on with the effects. So we have this nice cube here. But if we go in, we of course only have the light, and that is not really realistic or where we're going to end this. So yeah, we need to add some effects to this. So things like dust particles and things like bubbles, which is something that you will see in underwater footage. And that's also what we're going to add here to make it more realistic. So yeah, to keep it simple, we are going to keep everything in this water cube. So we have our material here and the volumetrics. And now we're also going to add in a particle system. And this first one will be dust. We're going to be adding in dust particles. So just add in a particle system, keep it as emitter, then go over to the source and make sure that it emits from the volume and not from the faces only, just so we can also see it inside here. We can go back to solid mode so we can see it a little bit better. But yeah, now it's inside. We can increase the amount a little bit, something like 10,000. Probably be too much, but just so we can see. Alright, make sure that the frame start is set to either 1 or 0 or whatever, just so they're all in the cube at the beginning. I'm going to keep it a little bit less, something like 2000, that would be visible enough. Alright, so now I want to add in a icosphere, and I want to give this 2 subdivisions, just so it looks nice and smooth, but this will add a lot of geometry. But one subdivision looks like this, which is kind of janky, so 2 should be fine. Just hit shade smooth, and we are going to add a dust material to this. And then I'm going to move this by about minus 100 meters, just so it's out of sight, and that should be fine. Now back in my water, in the dust particle settings, I want to go over to the render tab and then render as object. And then we're going to select our icosphere, which I'm going to rename to dust. And now we can see our dust particles over here and in camera as well. And they will just drop down. All right, so to fix them dropping down, we can just go over to the field weights and just disabling gravity altogether. And now they will just float in one direction. Alright, so now they will move in one direction, so either X, Y, or Z. And we want some noise to that. So what we can do is we can do a couple of things for that. We can either go over to the velocity and then add in some randomization. That will work pretty well. Keep it pretty low number. And maybe set the normal to like 0.2, just so they move a little bit slower. Like this. This will create a nice effect. Or what you can also do is add in a force field and then add in turbulence right here. Move it to the middle somewhere. And then here in the properties, we can increase the noise amount and the strength to like 10. And this will also add in some turbulence. But I like to keep it all in the water object if I can, just so we don't have extra objects that we need to move around in a scene potentially. So something like this looks great. And then I also want to go over to the render back again and then set the scale to something pretty low, like 0.02, and then the scale randomness can be something like 0.8, 0.9, or maybe even 1 if you want. And now we can go over to rendered mode and we can see some particles here. So yeah, increase to whatever you need, or maybe just increase the scaling depending, of course, on your scene. This is just a guessing game for me as well, but I think 0.025 will be fine. Alright, so now we need to add in a material, because now they're just these weird little spheres. If I can render them, they just don't look like anything. So we can go over to the dust object and then go over to the dust material that we created. Alright, so in here, what I want to do is just make the alpha a little bit lower, just so we can see right through. Something like 0.2 or 0.1. Set the roughness to 1, just so, yeah, it's pretty rough. And then the color to white will be fine, maybe a little bit darker in color, like dark brown. But I recommend keeping the alpha between like 0.1 and 0.25. Otherwise, that 0.5 will be too dark. And this should be a little bit transparent. Alright, so now in total, that will look something like this. So that will be it for the dust. And now we can get over to some bubbles. So what I want to do is just duplicate our dust icosphere and then just rename this to bubbles and just hit this 2 for a new material and call this bubbles as well. And then in the water, we can go over to the particle system, add in a new particle system, call this bubbles, and pretty much just do the same exact thing. Keep the number a little bit lower, and then the frame start should be at 0. Lifetime can be like 240 or however long you want. Just give them a really long lifetime. Source can be volume. Velocity should be something like 0.1. Then randomize to 0.2. Render as object. Select bubbles. And then the scale should be a little bit bigger. So something like 0.005. That should be good. And also turn off the gravity, of course. Alright, so for these bubbles, I want to set the gravity to 0 again, and they should float now. And what I want to do for the bubbles is set the object aligned velocity of the Z to 1. And if I turn off the randomize, we can actually see the bubbles going up. So maybe just give this a little bit of randomize, not that much. And now the bubbles should all go up, depending on our Z, which would be realistic because bubbles don't tend to float down or just stay. So they should be moving up. And with a little bit of randomize, you can just add in that tiny bit of randomization to the path it takes to the top. And then we can go back to the bubbles material. And for this one, we are going to be setting the transmission to 1. And I'm just going to find a bubble here, just so we can look at it. Like this one. Alright, so transmission to 1. The alpha should be 1 as well. And then the roughness is something like 0.5 or even less. You don't want this to be too shiny, of course, so maybe 0.25 will be fine. And then the IOR should be, I guess, the IOR of water. We can Google what the IOR of a bubble is. Alright, so Google says it's just water. So 1 plus 1 divided by 3. That should be a good IOR. And set the color to white. And this will be our bubble. So now if we go back, this is a pretty big bubble, so maybe they need to be a little bit smaller, like 3.5, 2.5. This really depends on what you're going for. If you have this density of the water a little bit lower, then maybe it should look like the bubbles would be bigger, but for me this looks pretty zoomed out. So I think the bubble should be small. Anyways, we now have some nice bubbles going up sometimes, and that looks really great. Remember to bake all of these in the cache dropdown, just so it renders better when you go to render, but we'll go over that in optimization later. So another thing you might want to add effects for is, for example, the car model I had in the beginning preview frame. So I'm also going to show you how I did the bubbles for that one. So I'm just going to import a car model really quickly, and I don't really care which one that is. Like for example, this Audi model will be fine. Just place it somewhere here. Oh, and that's also a really cool thing about the lighting, is it actually looks just so great. So yeah, sometimes the subject is a really nice addition to your scene as well. As you can see here, this looks amazing. But yeah, okay. We have our car model here. Let's say it just crashed into the water. It came from right here, violent crash. So we just want to go into edit mode and then just like copy some of the things where we want the bubbles to come from. So for me, that would be the hood of this car. So just duplicate those and then P to separate selection. And then I want to move this to my collection and just call this emitter. And then this can go back to being linked, I guess. So now we have our emitter here, and we can just remove all of the materials and things. We don't really need them because this will not be visible in the final scene. And then we want to go over to the particle system, add in a new particle system. Call this bubble crash, I guess, here as well. Keep it as emitter. Just do the same things that we did before, but then set the normal velocity to 0 and just keep it like that. Set up the render, and we're just going to reuse our bubbles and just scale randomness to something like 0.8 and the scale to 0.35, I think we did with the water. 0.25. Okay, well, these can be a little bit bigger because they came so violently. Disable the gravity, and what you do want is the force, because we're going to be using that. Make sure in viewport display you disable emitter. Well, it doesn't really matter in the viewport, but in the render make sure to disable show emitter, just so when we render this you won't see a really weird like hood of the car. So now it's being emitted and it's not moving because we set the velocity to 0. But then what we want to add in is a force field and wind. And we're just going to place that right behind the car. And we're just going to be pointing it at where the car would have landed in the water from. So something like this would make sense. Just going a little bit back like that. So something like that. Doesn't really have to be perfect. And then we can set the strength to something pretty big, like 200, I guess. Maybe that's too big. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, that's a little bit too big. Okay. 100. It's also pretty big. Alright, so maybe just 10. That looks great. Add in a lot of noise and disable the flow, just so it looks nice and noisy. And kind of angle it until it looks nice. Something like that. Yeah, that should be great. Increase the particle amount to something like 5,000. As you can tell, I'm really just guessing all of these values. So do that with yourself as well. Alright, so the frame start and end should be like your animation, because this should be a continual thing. The idea behind that is there's air in the car that needs to go out, so it goes out under the hood. So set the end to whatever end your timeline is at, or something above that, and make sure your number reflects that. So this is going to be gradually emitted, these numbers. So you're not going to start with 10,000, but they're going to be gradually added over these frames. Set the lifetime to something like 40, just so they have enough lifetime to exit the frame. So let's see, 40 would be something here. So I think 10 would do good as well. Will help with some optimization. 15, let's see. Yeah, 15 would be good. Okay. Okay, so here will be our bubbles. And I also want to, for these bubbles specifically, I want to add in another one of those turbulences. So if you chose to use turbulence in the last thing I did with the dust, you can just reuse that one. But if you didn't add one for that, you might want to add in turbulence for this exact step. But it's all optional, you know. I just like how this looks. So just placed it somewhere here. I don't think it really matters that much, to be honest. Set the strength to something pretty big, I guess. And then the noise amount to 10. And if we view from the camera, we can increase the strength until it looks good. Like 25, I think. Just so it's nice and dispersed. And yeah, that is looking pretty good. Okay. Maybe decrease the wind strength. Yeah, okay, so I think those are the values. So just going over them again, so you can copy them if you want. Wind, strength of 2, noise amount of 10, flow of 0, and then turbulence, strength of 25, and noise amount of 10. Okay. And as you will see, the dust and the bubbles will also move with this. And we don't really want that, so we can go back to the particle systems right here. Just scroll all the way down to field weights again, and then just disable whatever you have added. So I have turbulence, so I'm going to disable that. And I also have wind, so I'm going to disable that. And then for the bubbles as well, turbulence and wind. And now if we view this, only our particle system on the car will be affected by our wind and turbulence. Turbulence might be a little bit too much actually, because it's going down, which is pretty weird. That might be the wind angle as well. So yeah, you really have to play with this, but overall, this looks pretty great. So if we go to rendered mode, you will see some bubbles. If you want the slow motion effect, which is a pretty specific effect that Blender doesn't really do well, I'm going to be honest. But we can just open up the timeline because it's important. It's pretty weird to look at. And then you want to go over to the output properties. That's the one. And then you want to go over to this frame range thing and then go over to time stretching. Click on that. And then we want to change the old to the new. So old will be pretty much what it's right now. So every frame will be like a frame. Yeah, I don't know how else to put it. 24 frames right now will be 1 second. And yeah, that's pretty much how it is. But if we change the new, we can remap that. So if I change the new to 200, every 48 frames will be 1 second. And you will see that if I set my playhead to 48, the line will go here, which will be 24, which is, it looks really weird. But if we play, it is now playing at half the speed. So for the preview thing I did in the beginning, I set that to 400. So it's nice and slow. And now as I see this, you will see the bubbles start appearing here, which we don't really want probably. So go over to the emitter again and particle system, just set the frame start to something like minus your lifetime will be best. So minus 15, and then at the beginning frame, ideally your bubbles should be all the way at the top here already. But yeah, that's how you do a slow motion effect. And I think that's all of the effects I'm going to cover in this course, because these are the only things I can think of that you would use in underwater lighting. So yeah, let's get over to the next chapter. Alright, so now for actually just optimizing this a little bit better, I'm just going to show you a couple things. So you can just go over to rendered mode. And I found for like this particular scene, 256 samples is right about the right amount you need. 128 is kind of pushing it a little bit. So I suggest something like 200 and higher. And of course turn on denoise. And what you can actually do in the newer version of Blender is you can click use GPU on your denoise, which makes it so much faster. This is an amazing feature that Blender has given us. So yeah, if you have a good GPU, just click that. That will make your renders infinitely better or faster. Probably also better, but I don't know. I don't know why this isn't on by default if you have GPU compute on. But yeah, that might be something for a different update. But yeah, you can just click GPU. In the light paths, I don't really think this matters too much. You can like turn down the transmission a little bit, but then the bubbles start to disappear. So keep that at least like 4, I think. That should be enough. Something you do probably want to check if you have like a car model is go over here to performance and just click persistent data, just so it doesn't have to load in every single frame, and it will just reuse the data from the previous scene. Alright, so that will be it for like the render settings. Then you can go over to the emitter, and what you can do is just cache this, which will bake it, and then you will be able to replay this smoothly without any frame drops because it's cached, so it's in your memory. Same with the water, just you can just bake all dynamics, so you don't have to go in between these two and click bake for both. You can just click bake all dynamics, which will bake all of the particle systems you have. So now this will be a constant 24 frames per second. Of course, if we go to cycles, that wouldn't be the case because it needs to render. But yeah, this will be a little bit better for the consistency in your renders as well. So this will actually allow you to render this in like multiple sessions, which I did for all of these preview shots, because the render times for this aren't great, to be honest. So yeah, another thing you can probably change is the resolution, which for me is 4K ultra wide, but you might want to set this to like 50 if you're just doing a preview. That will make it about 4 times faster as well. Something else I like to do to make the renders a little bit better is if you go over to the advanced tab here, we have a seed here, and I always like to click this animated seed just so the noise pattern is different on every single frame, which also helps it hide a little bit more, which in turn also allows you to go down in samples a little bit, but it's only a tiny amount. But in the long run, that will also give you back some render time. Yeah, that is pretty much all I can say about optimization. So if you enjoyed this course, please leave a like and subscribe, and then I can make more of these in the future. And I'm sorry I was gone for a month, probably none of you cared, but yeah, I was busy and also wanting to make better videos like this one, so I hope this is better. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.